Hey, I'm Elissa. This is Eileen. We're from Sound Museum Collective, and we're here to show you how to put together your radio kit. So, let's check it out. Let me show you some of the things that you might need to get started. So, we have our soldering iron. Let's plug it in so it can start getting warmed up. Next, which you might not think of, is having a wet sponge. This is going to help you clean the tip of your soldering iron while you're going around. See, it'll get kind of burned up. But having a wet sponge is going to be really important. Here I have something called helping hands. It totally makes sense if you don't have one of these, because it took me years of soldering before I even got one. But it might be helpful to have something that you can like prop up your board or something in some way while you're soldering. It'll just make it a little bit easier. Here's your kit. If you have wire cutters or something that you could use to, like scissors, the solder, if you needed solder in your kit, it's going to be the little metal coil that I put in there that looks like this. That's your solder. Also, having a good work light is actually pretty important. It's really going to help you see the very, very tiny pieces. And last but not least, besides everything that's included in the kit, having a tiny screwdriver is going to be really helpful for when you screw everything in the end. So, we recommend for just organizational purposes, going through and separating everything by its kind. If you want to look close here, there might be kind of a glare because of the tape, but the resistors, you'll notice that each resistor has a different set of stripes on it and a different combination. Separate your resistors by each of those stripes. And we'll talk more about what each of those values are, but for now, just for the purpose of organization, just separate everything. I like to tape it down because I'm kind of klutzy and I have a tendency to and these pieces are just so small, you don't want to lose anything. So this isn't everything in the kit. These are just some of the components that we're going to solder on first. So I would take a moment to do that right now if you haven't yet. Okay, so the first thing we're going to start with are the capacitors. Mostly because we took pictures of the capacitors first. So on your wiring diagram or your schematic, the symbol for capacitor looks like this. Capacitors come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, but for the most part what they're used for is to store energy. So just to show you a few examples on our board right here of different kinds of capacitors. We have these guys right here are a kind of capacitor. We have these capacitors up here, the ones that look like little pillows. And then all of these are ceramic capacitors. So we're going to start by doing all of these first. And we're going to start by doing the 475s to begin with. And those look like this. This isn't the case with all the capacitors, but for these 470s that we're going to start off with, as you can see, first of all, 470 is listed on the side of it. It's in focus. And you'll notice that one end is longer than the other. This end is the positive side, and this end is the negative side. And if you look at your PCB board, printed circuit board, you'll notice when you see the symbol we were just talking about? When you find the correct one for 470, you'll notice that they're, like for instance right here, you'll notice that one side is a plus and one is a minus. You want to put the longer end of the capacitor in the plus sign. And then another thing that's worth noting is our solder is not glue. It is actually just creating a connection for us. So once you put this through, it doesn't have to be totally flush with the board, but it is important to secure it on there. And something else you can do if this proves to be difficult, bending the legs back like this, I do recommend taking a piece of tape, and you can just tape it on this side. But it is really helpful to have it secured on before you start soldering. What we found when we are building the kit is you should have one extra of each of the components when you go through. So if you want, you can just put that right back underneath your tape in case you lose something. Okay, so next we're gonna do the 104s, and that's all of these ceramic capacitors. We're gonna bring up a picture right now that will show you where everything goes, so you can pause your video and put all those where they're supposed to be. And once again, once you put them in, you can just bend the legs back like this.
I'm gonna show where they are at. I guess we'll...
Okay, so one thing before we bring up the video of where, or the photo of where everything goes, that's worth noting, just so you don't get confused, is these ones don't have a positive and negative leg. The legs are the same size, so you don't have to worry about that. And let's see, there's one right here, so you can just put it in either or, and once again, just bend it back.
Something to look out for, there is a 104 on this side as well, so not to be missed. And now we're going to go on to 202, which there should just be one of. And you can look at the photo to figure out where it is. It's right here. Next we have the 30s, which we'll be doing 4 of. And again, it doesn't matter which way you put them in. Just make sure you bend them back so that they don't fly back out. So the 30s are all kind of in a row here, and pretty easy to identify. 1, 2, 3, 4, all kind of clustered with each other. Now we're going to do the 2. There's only one, so you'll have one left over. And the 2 is right here, right next to the 104 that we put in earlier. So now we're going to do the 472, which there are 2 of.
A cool ASMR video.
And the 472s are actually right next to each other. Pretty easy to find. Right here next to the 104, and then over here. And I don't know if this was said before, but the symbols are all the same for this. So if you're looking on the board, you can make sure that they're all filled in. Same symbol that Alyssa drew earlier. That is the exact same symbol they use on the board to mark where all of them go. So then you can kind of cross-check and make sure you didn't miss any. So we're gonna do the 20s now, which there are 2 of.
And I believe one of them is on the second piece.
Oh yes, so one is here. Actually, I think both of them are here, right next to each other.
Perfect. And once again, we'll pull up the picture so you'll be able to see.
And now we will finish with the 82, which there is only one of. And it is right up here. And then there we go. We are done with the capacitors. Okay, so now we're going to start with cutting some solder, so we can start soldering all our pieces on.
Okay, so what we see Eileen doing right here is something called tinning. What they're doing is they're going to coat the tip of the soldering iron in solder before we even start. And then they're using the wet sponge right now to just kind of roll it around so you don't have too much of a glob on there. Oh, it's a little out of focus. Keep. Come on. That's great. Anyway, you get the idea. So now, Eileen is going to start demonstrating soldering. So, if you've never soldered before, don't be intimidated. It takes a second to figure out how to do it. Tinning really does help, but if you can watch closely, what Eileen is doing is putting the iron on the component first to heat that up, and then feeding the solder into it to make what looks like these little bubbles. And we recommend doing it component by component just because your PCB is going to start getting pretty crowded with all those long legs. And then once you're done with this, we'll go through and we'll cut off the extra leg. But once again, as you can see, what she's doing is heating up the leg first and then kind of just feeding that solder onto it and rolling it off. It's also worth noting that solder is lead. So if you feel like you might be sensitive to the fumes, it is definitely helpful to have a fan going. But see the way that their bubbles look? That's ideally what you want to go for. It might take a little bit to get your bubbles like that. But once again, what you're going to do is heat up your leg first and then gently just feed the solder in. And you can continue that with all the legs on the back. Okay, and just to make sure everything's a little bit clean and we have enough room on our board, we're going to take our wire cutters, or if you don't have wire cutters, scissors, and just going through and cutting off some of these excess legs like this. Also a very satisfying part, if you ask me. Oh, we have an unsoldered tip.